North and South is a social novel by English writer Elizabeth Gaskell. With Wives and Daughters, 1865, and Cranford, 1853, it is one of her best-known novels and was adapted for television twice, 1975 and 2004. The later version renewed interest in the novel and attracted a wider readership. Gaskell's first novel, Mary Barton, 1848, focused on relations between employers and workers in Manchester from the perspective of the working poor. North and South uses a protagonist from southern England to present and comment on the perspectives of mill owners and workers in an industrializing city. The novel is set in the fictional industrial town of Milton in the north of England. Forced to leave her home in the tranquil, rural South, Margaret Hale settles with her parents in Milton. She witnesses the brutal world wrought by the Industrial Revolution, seeing employers and workers clashing in the first strikes. Sympathetic to the poor, whose courage and tenacity she admires and among whom she makes friends, she clashes with John Thornton, a nouveau riche cotton mill owner who is contemptuous of his workers. The novel traces her growing understanding of the complexity of labor relations and their impact on well-meaning mill owners and her conflicted relationship with John Thornton. Gaskell based her depiction of Milton on Manchester, where she lived as the wife of a Unitarian minister. Plot edit. 19-year-old Margaret Hale happily returns home from London to the idyllic southern village of Helstone after her cousin Edith marries Captain Lennox. She lived for almost 10 years in the city with Edith and wealthy Aunt Shaw to learn to be a young lady. Margaret has refused an offer of marriage from the captain's brother, Henry, an up-and-coming barrister. Her life is turned upside down when her father, the local pastor, leaves the Church of England in the rectory of Helstone as a matter of conscience. His intellectual honesty has made him a dissenter. At the suggestion of Mr. Bell, his old friend from Oxford, he settles with his wife and daughter in Milton Northern, where Mr. Bell was born and owns property. The industrial town in Berkshire, a textile-producing region, manufactures cotton and is in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. Masters and workers are clashing in the first organized strikes. 11. Margaret finds the bustling, smoky town of Milton harsh and strange, and she is upset by its poverty. Mr. Hale, in reduced financial circumstances, works as a tutor. One of his pupils is the wealthy and influential manufacturer John Thornton, master of Marlborough Mills. From the outset, Margaret and Thornton are at odds with each other. She sees him as coarse and unfeeling, and he sees her as haughty. He is attracted to her beauty and self-assurance, and she begins to admire how he has risen from poverty. During the 18 months she spends in Milton, Margaret gradually learns to appreciate the city and its hard-working people, especially Nicholas Higgins, a union representative, and his daughter Bessie, whom she befriends. Bessie is ill with byssinosis from inhaling cotton dust, which eventually kills her. 12. Margaret's mother is becoming sicker, and a workers' strike is brewing. Masters and hands, workers, do not resolve the strike, and an incensed mob of workers threatens Thornton and his factory with violence after he brings Irish workers to his mill. Margaret begs Thornton to intervene and talk to the mob, but he only fuels their anger. Margaret intervenes, and is hit by a stone. Soldiers arrive. The mob disperses and Thornton carries Margaret indoors, professing his love to her unconscious figure. Thornton proposes, Margaret declines, unprepared for his declarations of love and offended by assumptions that her action in front of the mob meant that she cared for him. Mrs. Thornton, wary of Margaret's southern, haughty, ways, is galled by Margaret's rejection of her son. Margaret's long-absent brother, Frederick, who is wanted for naval mutiny, secretly visits their dying mother. Thornton sees Margaret and Frederick together, and assumes that he is her lover. Leonards, a man from Helstone, later recognizes Frederick at the train station. They argue, Frederick pushes Leonards away, and Leonards dies shortly afterwards. When the police question Margaret about the scuffle, she lies and says she was not present. As the magistrate investigating Leonard's death, Thornton knows that Margaret lied but declares the case closed to save her from possible perjury. Margaret is humbled by his deed on her behalf. She no longer only looks down on Thornton as a hard master, and begins to recognize the depth of his character. Nicholas, at Margaret's prodding, approaches Thornton for a job and eventually obtains one. Thornton and Higgins learn to appreciate and understand each other. Mr. Hale visits his oldest friend, Mr. Bell, in Oxford. He dies there, and Margaret returns to live in London with Aunt Shaw. She visits Helstone with Mr. Bell and asks him to tell Thornton about Frederick, but Mr. Bell dies before he can do so. He leaves Margaret a legacy which includes Marlborough Mills and the Thornton House. Thornton is forced to limit production due to market fluctuations and the strike, and fears bankruptcy. He learns the truth about Margaret's brother from Nicholas Higgins, and comes to London to settle his business affairs with Margaret. When Margaret presents Thornton with a generous business proposal, he realizes that she is no longer indifferent or antagonistic to him. He again proposes marriage and, since she has learned to love him, she accepts.